Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
My next guest, my first guest even, is a fan of AC/DC. He's a terrific journalist and he heads up 21stcenturywire.com. Check out 21stcenturywire.com. It's a terrific read, always is. Really well thought out, well put together articles on there on a daily basis. He presents the outstanding Sunday Wire every Sunday on alternatecurrentradio.com. The Wire broadcasts at 5 p.m. on Sundays. You can see him often on RT and many other channels giving his pretty considered and very well briefed take on what's going on geopolitically. Let's welcome back to the programme, great friend of ours, Mr. Patrick Henningsen, who jumped in at the last minute to bail us out. Thanks for doing that, by the way. Great to have you back, Patrick. How are you?
I'm good. How you doing, Richie?
Really well, mate. Yeah, I sincerely thank you for that as well, by the way. You're up to your eyes with your own work, so jumping in at the last minute is really appreciated. To say I owe you one is an understatement. Let's jump right in there then with the General, the latest NATO commander of Europe, the General, what's he called? Philip Breedlove, who yesterday briefed a Senate committee and said quite a bit about the possibilities of dangerous young men entering European countries in the tidal wave of migrants. A not unreasonable thing to say, I didn't think. But he's had second thoughts because he's elaborated today, and as you will know by now, of course, because you're all over this, he's now been saying that the Syrian and Russian governments are using this to weaponise people coming into Europe. That's an amazing claim to make, and typically it hasn't yet anyway, not yet to give him a chance, been backed up with any evidence. What do you say to that?
Well, I'm waiting for any quote by General Philip Breedlove that is backed up by any evidence. I haven't ever heard one, but he's the NATO mouthpiece. And if you look back, we've covered a lot of things that this guy has said and done at 21st Century Wire, and he's fighting a war. His position, what you got to understand is, as a spokesperson for NATO, he's not a general in the traditional military sense of the word, but he is a sort of special operations command. He's forward operations command, which is basically information warfare. So what he's doing here is what he has been doing with the Ukraine, with chiming in on Syria and the migrant crisis. In this case, he's basically he's not speaking specifically to the Russians or to the Syrians. He's speaking to the West. It's meant to look as if he's having a go at Russia and Syria for the crisis and blaming them and so forth. But what he's really doing, he's lobbying to his own audience, basically. This is hybrid warfare. So this is sort of like public relations, high-end public relations for the military. And what he's trying to do is paint to his constituents that we need more money, we need more resources, we need a more aggressive policy, which we need to execute because his hands are tied. Russia has brought in air defense systems into Syria that have pretty much locked up the airspace. They can't have a no-fly zone, which is really what NATO and the U.S. coalition has wanted all along. They can't get it because they literally do not have tactical advantage in that region. So now we're into the public relations game. Now we need to basically up the ante publicly. We need to raise the threat level. We now need to blame Syria and Russia for the migrant crisis. So it's in effect what he's doing is blaming Syria and Russia for the very thing that the United States coalition has started themselves.
Absolutely.
So it's a complete deflection.
And on that then, I mentioned in the monologue, David Kilcullen, Australian sounding guy, who used to advise the United States government on counter-insurgency, was on Channel 4 News yesterday. And again, unchallenged, as is the norm on these mainstream news outlets, guys can come on there and say whatever the bloody hell they want. And woe betide any presenter who actually challenges them on their nonsense. But Kilcullen said that basically to fight ISIS, you really have to fight them. And Murphy asked him, are you basically saying that we need to send troops in there? And he backed off a bit and stumbled and fumbled. And Morsi didn't go after him in the way he should go after him. But this is what we're building up to, Patrick, isn't it? We're building up to a large-scale invasion of Syria by another coalition, this time of the United States, with Saudi Arabia, with the United Arab Emirates, maybe with one or two others, possibly with the support of the British government. We're heading for another Iraq-type situation. What do you think?
I think we are. I think there is. You're right. There is a big push, for a build-up for, let's say, an on-the-ground stroke air coordinated, expanded military operation in Syria and northern Iraq. I think that's definitely on the cards. That's definitely what people like Breedlove and Carter Ham and anybody else who you see in the news talking about these things on any of the networks and the major media outlets, like you said, they want to see this happen. Now, getting that to happen isn't so easy. There's a lot of obstacles in the way to making that happen. One of them is the hearts and minds of the public relations war. So on that side of the hybrid warfare, they have a huge mountain that they have to overcome, because they have two problems. In Iraq, it was a kind of a binary action, and they called it a kinetic action at the time. And you really had a kind of figurehead, evil statesman who was a lone wolf, and they created a narrative which was a sort of a fake narrative. Weapons of mass destruction, hiding chemical weapons, anthrax, missiles in 45 minutes, going to hit our bases in Cyprus, Jack Straw, and all the rest of it. And it all came together with some fake intelligence reporting. And then they had this case for a major military intervention. They've tried a number of things, from the fake chemical weapons attacks in Damascus in August of 2013, other fake chemical weapons or false flag chemical weapons attacks which have been perpetrated by the rebels or the so-called rebels. They're really most of them terrorist groups, and by ISIS and so forth, and then trying to blame this on the Syrian government. And they've tried all these things. So then all they're going to do is keep trying other angles. They are not going to give up until they get some kind of a safe zone, a no-fly zone, some sort of entry point or some enclave where they can have the terrorist rebels and militants can be protected in some kind of a safe zone. And they're trying to sell this as a safe zone for refugees or for the poor people that are suffering. We need to build them a safe zone. Everybody's talking about it in the U.S. All the politicians are coming up with this idea, but it's a bogus idea. All it is they want to basically have a place where they can launch forward operations to maintain instability in that country for at least the next 10 years.
Patrick,
at least a decade.
When you talked about there about some of the things that the Assad government has been accused of in the last few years, I mentioned to Yvonne Ridley. Yvonne Ridley was on last night. Very interesting woman, very interesting guest. Some of our audience not thrilled about some of her beliefs or some of her assertions as to what's happening. But Yvonne is one of these people whose beliefs are her own, regardless of whether we agree with them or not. And I like people whom, at the very least, whether they're right or wrong, and I'm wrong plenty of times myself, but once their beliefs and their ideology is their own. But, I did mention to her last night, much of particularly in England anyway, much of the claims made, or many of the claims made, or all of the claims made about the Assad government were made by a guy called Rami Abdul Rahman, who's based in Coventry and works for the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is basically him. He is the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights based in the Midlands here in England. And this is a guy who has had problems with the Assad government in the past. He's an unapologetic, or he has, he's not been in any way apologetic about his hatred for Assad. And I also mentioned yesterday, you don't have to do too much research to find out. Even Stephen Kinzer's article in the Boston Globe a couple of weeks back, there are no journalists there. Eva Bartlett has been there, friend of yours, whom you've interviewed on The Wire, on Sunday Wire. And I've been lucky enough to have her on this programme, travelled there, an independent woman wanting to report on this for herself. But outside of that, Patrick, people with hostility, with a history of hostility with the Assad government, and people who've never been to Syria are people writing the narrative about the crazy madman that is Bashar al-Assad. And I just wish, Patrick, is that more people, particularly now that we're in election year in the United States, that more people would wake up to that fact.
That is a problem, and this is sort of an inbuilt problem because there was, I don't know, sort of a moratorium, or journalists weren't able to get in to Syria to do any sort of open reporting for two reasons from 2011 till just recently. One of them was safety. It's really dangerous place to be working. So this is an asymmetric war, basically. And it's internal as well. And you have a number of foreign fighters, multiple factions. You've got the U.S. who started, doing bombing runs as well in 2014 with their coalition and so forth. So it's a free-for-all. It's been a free-for-all. So it's been a really hard place to work. Recently, it's stabilized somewhat where you have been able to get reporters in, but only a couple of days ago, a number of journalists were basically targeted with mortar attacks and artillery rounds in Latakia, and a couple of them were injured, not seriously, but French and Russian and another European journalist, I think.
Was it Turkish forces firing on these journalists?
I don't know. I think it was.
That's the rumor, though, no? Or is it am I thinking of something else?
It could be. It was near the Turkish border.
Yeah, near the Turkish border. Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't know for sure who was firing, but again, this underscores the fact that it's a dangerous place. That being said, the whole point of Iraq and Afghanistan is the U.S. and British and the Europeans established the precedent of embedded journalists. Now that you've had embedded journalists before, but what it was in Iraq was really a way to control information coming out of the theater through the media and to the public. So total control over the complete, line of information. That was the point of it, because they needed to sanitize what was going on, because there was a lot of bad stuff going on, obviously, and they're really concerned with what they call optics now, how it looks in the public. But in Syria, you have no control over optics and so forth. So it's really problematic. The problem as well is the media took a side early. CNN, the BBC, everybody, they've taken from 2011, they did this in Libya too. They took a side, which was the side of NATO or the side of Washington or the Foreign Office. And everything was skewed and twisted to basically dovetail with the foreign policy directives that are coming out of Whitehall, that are coming out of Washington. So the media can't pretend to be even unbiased.
And Patrick, can I just jump in there, because you'll remember, this is important to remind our listeners of, you will remember because you've written about it, that we saw a number of crawling, tearful almost editorials from broadsheet newspapers and from the BBC in 2006, 2007 and so on, swearing that we would never see this again, that we would never see a situation where the media basically ran hand in hand with the government of the day or the establishment of the day to cheerlead the country into a foreign invasion. Do you remember those editorials? Do you remember in The Guardian and in other newspapers?
Yeah.
And Jesus, they got worse, didn't they? They didn't get better, they got worse, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll criticize The Guardian. I like a lot of work in The Guardian, but the position they took on the Syrian conflict early on, calling it a civil war and referring to Assad as the regime, just that word, the regime, that's completely pejorative. It's completely, it's leading in so many ways. And they use this to demonize various heads of state who they don't particularly want to see in power very much longer. So this is part of the public relations campaign. The Guardian was basically, unquestioningly going for a lot of this, although they ran some good stuff. Charlie Skelton wrote an amazing piece early on. If you go back and look it up, I think it was in 2011, basically exposing the Syrian opposition that the West had assembled, and all these people through how they're being funded, who they actually get their money from, the Syrian National Council, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, all of this stuff. He did a great expose back in 2011. And if you go back and read this thing, and I was reading it a couple of months ago when I was researching a piece I was doing, and I'm like, he's laid it all out back in 2011, and that was one of the only honest pieces I ever saw in The Guardian that really got in depth and really just showed how this whole theater has been constructed to topple the government of Syria, essentially, and to reshape the region or redraw the borders or whatever the end game is. But the BBC have been horrible in this regard. I mean, almost running propaganda for the Department of War. That's what the BBC has been doing from the beginning with it. So totally dishonest. Plus, you have all these activist journalists running around who are getting funded by various George Soros-linked organizations in Syria, and saying they're activist journalists. They created a new category, and these are really people who are kind of promoting this idea for regime change, which happens to lock nicely into what London and Washington are preaching. So, of course, CNN is drawing off these white helmets videos, which many of them could be completely staged. There's no way to authenticate them. Many of the members of the so-called Syrian civil defense, white helmets, who get their funding from the Foreign Office, by the way. Some of them are also caught in photographs with al-Nusra front, even one execution. We covered this at 21st Century Wire, and so Vanessa Beeley wrote a number of good pieces on this. And you're saying to yourself, there's a major connection here between the governments of the West in these activist journalists who are supposed to be these independent, freedom-fighting people you see on avaz.org, and the sort of the global village of loveliness, in the virtual world of liberal international digital activism.
Yeah, we see there's another one called there's another one called A+, isn't there? I see that all the time as well. Yeah. And it looks fantastic, and it looks like something that you really should be watching, because it's got these socialist ideas. And but when you dig down into where these come from, and you mentioned Soros there, who I believe today is calling for Europe to take 1 million migrants a year from now on into Europe. Well, he would do, wouldn't he? Let me do a recap. 21 minutes to the top of the hour. Genuinely thrilled to have Patrick Henningsen back on the programme. Check out 21stcenturywire.com. Do it now if you haven't done it before, and set your clock for the Sunday Wire programme, which broadcasts right here on alternatecurrentradio.com every Sunday at 5 p.m. GMT. I say GMT because I'm obviously in Manchester here. That is 12 noon Eastern time. It would be 10. I'm guessing it's actually 9 a.m. Pacific time, but check the times on 21stcenturywire.com. So many nice tweets coming in. Joe Wood says, big hello to Patrick. How you doing, Joe? To Des Britton. Des says, Yvonne Ridley's opinions are not her own. She's a Zionist shill. Des, we've been over this before. At least I have with other people on Twitter. When somebody disagrees with us, Des, they're not necessarily shills, mate. They just disagree. And we kind of have to get over that, like it or not. I want to say out to Dion, to Hamish, to Hubertes, to Sean Hinchcliffe as well. How you doing, Sean? Nice to know you're listening. Once again, folks, 21stcenturywire.com. A couple of things I want to cover, Patrick, as time does fly by. We've got probably 15 good minutes left. Couple of things. Our news broadcast at the top of the hour talked about the United Nations sanctioning North Korea. One of the things it said in its indictment, the news bulletin's indictment of North Korea, which is obviously a horrible place. So let's be honest about it. Some of our listeners, they go a bit too far sometimes in what they believe in the independent media. North Korea is horrible. It really is. However, one of the justifications for making life even worse for the civilians there, because that's what sanctions do, they punish the innocent people living there under the brutal regime. One of the things they said, Patrick, was that 25% of North Korean children are malnourished. Now, I've read a number of studies in the last 2 years, and studies from various children's charities in the United States to suggest that, by an amazing coincidence, 1 in 4 US children are likely to miss at least one meal a day because of, more and more austerity, more and more difficult times for families. What do you have on that figure, Patrick, of 1 in 4 children in the United States struggling with, not getting 3 squares a day? Do you subscribe to that? Do you buy into that?
I don't. That's a tough one because
Isn't it?
If you've been in Europe, which I spend probably most of my time in Europe, and overwhelmingly over the last 22 years, I've spent all my time in Europe. Then I come back to America just intermittently, and the first thing you notice is obviously the difference in people's weight. It's a much more obese society in America on the whole. So that argument and some of the people who, and you'll find this too in Britain, by the way, Richie, and a lot of people have written ad nauseum on this. The lower income brackets are the people sometimes with the most problems of obesity or health problems that are linked to weight. Why is that? Because if you go to Iceland or you shop at what used to be Quick Save and places like this, in America you have supermarkets like Safeway and Target and stuff. And Walmart, it's junk. The junk food has the most sort of processed ingredients in it, the most sort of chemicals, the most fructose corn syrup, and etc. And these are all the things that cause all these sort of adverse hormonal reactions and cause out of control obesity. So, as far as undernourished, underfed, so it's possible. But a lot of the schools, public schools, the lunches are subsidized, so they're going to get at least two squares a day if they go to a public school. And when I say public, I mean state-run, not the fake public school term that you use in Britain to make it sound like it's egalitarian. No, real public schools, you get subsidized lunch and milk and things like that. So I don't know. That's a tough one. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are in dire need in America. We do have a giant underclass in this country. Make no mistake about that. But I think you're also going to find a lot more obesity in the lower income brackets and a lot more health problems linked to obesity.
Well answered, mate. Yeah, I absolutely see where you're coming from there. I've been trying to dig into that for a few years because I presented a radio show in Spain, and on the schedule was an American presenter, and he fell out with me over that. He was very conservative in his political views and was absolutely disgusted to hear me talking about child poverty in the States. And, despite me showing him various studies, but studies are studies, and I'm well aware of that as well. Good answer. 16 minutes to the top of the hour. Patrick Henningsen is with us. Got to talk about Super Tuesday. 12 states, of course, voting in the primaries in the United States yesterday, choosing a presidential candidate from the Democratic Party and from the Republican Party. Did we learn anything yesterday, Patrick, that we didn't already know? We've believed for a long time that, well, at least on this programme anyway, is that it would be Donald J. Trump against Hillary Rodham Clinton in November. Nothing to change that, I don't think. What do you think?
Well, I think it's too early to tell. I mean, there's a huge hashtag campaign going called #NeverTrump, and everyone's pulling out all the stops to try to derail Donald Trump's march to the Republican nomination. But the next hashtag we released to preempt that is going to be "Never Say Never." Never
Right.
say never, never Trump, because you can never say never. I mean, either way, a lot of things could happen. They tried to. CNN did probably the dirtiest trick I've ever seen, although I've seen it done before. They did this to Ron Paul in 2012. They basically produced a newsletter that had been crumpled up, and it was like 20-something years old. That was a Ron Paul campaign newsletter when he ran as a libertarian candidate in the late 80s. I think it was 88. And it was published by some white supremacist group. And they stuck that out all over the media and basically said, well, Ron Paul, are you going to disavow this or not? And he didn't even know what it was. So he stumbled on it. And they used that basically to help destroy the Ron Paul surge, which was currently in motion at that time during the election. Now, what the CNN did, they brought Jake Tapper, their one of their hatchet men, had Trump on 2 days ago, and basically said, "Well, David Duke has just endorsed you as a candidate. Are you gonna reject that?" And all these other white supremacist groups. And so Trump's answer was probably an answer that I would give, which was, well, what groups are you talking about? Because if you say, yes, I disavow them, and then they included some other person in there who you didn't know about, and then maybe they weren't a white supremacist group, then you cause a secondary fight after that. So he asked, what are you talking about, basically? And then at the end, Jake Tapper said, well, David Duke. And then as Trump started speaking, Tapper from CNN said, and the KKK. He talked over him a little bit. And so it created this sort of confusion. And then Trump just said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so what they tried to do is impose this kind of yellow journalism. They tried to stick this. It's like slinging dirt, really, on that candidate, and you can't get that off. And the media ran with that for like 48 hours. Trump still swept the primary, Super Tuesday primary states, won 7 states, I think. So he still did well, but this shows you the media will not give up. They do not want Donald Trump anywhere near. Neither does the Republican establishment. They want to keep him as far away. They pumped up Marco Rubio for about 72 hours, giving him pretty much across the board coverage. They had exit polling at CNN. They said everyone coming out's voting for Rubio. It's extraordinary, blah, blah, blah. Giving this impression that Rubio is surging. And really, Rubio was actually declining because his stock is falling like an anvil off of the Empire State Building. It's not coming back.
Weren't callers to an Austin-based radio station complaining that when they chose Trump, in some cases, it seemed to jump to, was it Rubio or Ted Cruz? I can't remember.
Rubio, I think that was that
Rubio.
story. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Rubio didn't show very well in Texas, but neither did Trump. So there could be some credence there, but there's no proof. The problem with those stories, Richie, is that they don't offer any proof. I mean, people calling into a radio station isn't exactly proof, and that's frustrating because you want to get to the bottom of that. I would hope someone would investigate it, but I think you're going to find at the end of this election cycle and then the national too, you're going to see more accusations of voter fraud, election fraud, especially in a close race. If it is Hillary Clinton, it could be a brokered convention, Richie. Mitt Romney's going to make a big announcement tomorrow. He's basically coming and calling on Republicans to basically back off of Donald Trump and that threatening to launch a splinter party. He's got billions of dollars. He can fund that. So can all his buddies. They're pissed off, though, Richie, because they've all plowed hundreds of millions of dollars into Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, and others, and they've gotten nothing. So the billionaire class and the lobbyists are really pissed off.
I don't.
Where's our money going?
Where's the money going? Now, I don't doubt that for a minute, and I would say that these people are lower level in terms of the knowledge of what's really going on. But I would suggest that whatever the agenda or the real power brokers wants to happen will happen, and that whatever we're seeing playing out at the moment has actually been planned. And I think when we first mentioned the election, when we first spoke about it, I've always been of the opinion that what we're witnessing is, and I certainly don't have your insight into the election because you're on it pretty much 24/7, but for me, it's just one big Punch and Judy puppet show, which has always been part of the plan to send, basically to anoint Hillary Clinton as the first female president of the United States. And whether or not Donald Trump and his followers and Rubio and his followers and the GOP power brokers, whether they know that or not, I would suggest that's pretty much what's going on. What do you think?
I'm half in agreement with you on that, and there's a lot of things you could point to that says that's true. If you look at how things are playing out now, it's definitely working in the favor of the Democratic establishment, which is running the Hillary Clinton candidate, okay? And Hillary Clinton is by far the globalist choice. She's the choice of the neoconservatives. Robert Kagan endorsed her. Yeah. I'm sure Victoria Nuland will endorse her as well. So as far as the extreme right wing, they want Hillary Clinton. They've already made that clear. I mean, that's the most neocon think tank in Washington, Foreign Policy Initiatives, formerly Project for a New American Century. That's what it used to be called, okay? So we know what their agenda is. So, but here's the split side of this, though. I'm looking at broadcasters, I'm looking at political luminaries, I'm watching them on TV, and I know the difference between play acting and people short-circuiting on live TV. There is people short-circuiting, losing their rag over this, and high-level people in media and stuff. So that shows me that something is not actually going to plan, that there is a bit of a sort of situation that's brewing right now they're trying to fix. Now, here's the main issue, is that whether you like Trump or you hate Trump, or even the people that vote for him, they don't even agree with. This is the first candidate in U.S. political history that people are casting votes for, and they openly say, I don't agree with half of what he says, but I want him in. This never happened before, maybe not for 100-something years. So can all these voters be wrong? They're definitely angry. This is a referendum against the system. is essentially what it is. And Trump is probably the authentic figurehead for that referendum. And on the left, Richie, Bernie Sanders, I mean, that is the most unappealing political candidate you could possibly field, besides like Roger Rabbit or something. You know, he's beating Hillary Clinton in half the states. So that's a referendum on the left of young people roundingly rejecting the establishment, roundingly rejecting the Clinton machine, okay, on the left. So Bernie and Trump have a lot. They do represent something that's going on. Those are real votes, and the establishment has to take that into consideration under a democracy. And I know the elections are fixed to a large degree, but how fixed? They can only fix a close race, okay? You can't fix a blowout. And what you have potentially on the Trump side is a blowout against the establishment. I think that you're going to see a lot of dirty, crazy stuff that's going to be happening in the next couple of months.
I'll tell you what, and by the way, you're absolutely right to say that the tidal wave of support for Trump is genuine. Absolutely right it is. I would never dispute that. I see them. In fact, I was listening to Radio 5 Live on my morning jog this morning. Nicky Campbell had 2 or 3 people from different camps explaining why it is they back their candidate. And you're absolutely right. They really believe his base. It's almost evangelical, actually, how much they believe that he isn't the system, that he is a step away from it, that he's his own man, and you know that he's not beholden to special interest groups. You're absolutely right to say that. I've had a really interesting question from Scott that I want to put to you. We've only got a couple of minutes left, sadly, on this. Thanks, by the way, for jumping in, Patrick. Great stuff.
Sure.
Really mean that. It's great having you on, mate. I would have been calling you very soon anyway to talk about these issues. Patrick can be found at 21stcenturywire.com, and Sunday Wire is on every Sunday, 5 p.m. GMT, and you can hear it at alternatecurrentradio.com, where, by the way, I've been asked to remind you, there's always a very lively chat room whenever there's a programme on. And of course, ACR is packed with really interesting and well-researched programmes. The chat room is always full of people debating the merits or the lack of merit of what's being discussed on those programmes. So check out the chat room there. So Sean says, Richie, great guest. I listen to Patrick regularly. What does Patrick think of the Ezekiel 38 end time battle? Now, Sean says this was stated in the Jerusalem Times. And he says, now Russia are involved in stopping the Greater Israel Plan. Now, I'm always honest, I always put my hands up. I didn't hear of the Ezekiel 38 end time battle. That's why I do this programme, to learn stuff. Does that mean anything to you, Patrick?
My philosophy or belief on prophecies, I've been raised, as a Christian my whole life in a Christian family. I'm not practicing as such, going to church every week anymore, but I am familiar with different branches of Christianity, and prophecies are self-fulfilling. This has always been my belief, and this is from my study of Asian religions as well, and the study of karma from lay Buddhism and stuff like this. So I've always understood prophecy as a self-fulfilling thing. So in other words, you can create a narrative, you can create a story, and you can transpose that over current events, and then how people interpret that some people will say, oh, this is the prophecy which is being manifest, and others will say, well, no, it's not, it's just happening. And it depends who has the dominant swing on that narrative, because if it's the people who are dispensationalist, in other words, people who believe in the end times prophecy, if they have the dominant voice in interpreting events that are unfolding, then there's a higher chance that they will accelerate in a self-fulfilling fashion according to that prophecy. And it's a powerful thing when you inject religion in there too. And I think the same on the Islamic extremist side. They have an end times prophecy which is unfolding in Syria, running counter to what the right wing or fundamentalist Christian end times prophecy is. So it depends. I mean, I personally don't put any stock in it myself, but I know that people do. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, especially if those people are in political positions or in high-level decision-making positions. Then it becomes really a serious issue, because and we have that in America. We have people who do have dispensationalists leanings, or at least they pander to that crowd. And that can be a very dangerous thing, actually.
Patrick, I'll ask you finally, and I'll ask you to be as brief with this one if you don't mind, because we are rapidly running out of time. What about Trump and the whole question of Israel? Where's Trump on Israel?
Well, I think if you listen to the debate, I mean, I was shocked. He said that my greatest achievement as president would be to try to negotiate a peace deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And you could see the anger that was coming from Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, two people that receive a lot of money from the Zionist Israeli lobby. Okay. So they were angry. They're saying, no, we don't want any peace. Trump says, I have to be a neutral broker if I'm going to be able to negotiate a peace deal. And they're saying you can't be neutral between Israel and Palestine. The Palestinians are all terrorists and the Israelis are the victims. So this is how, so you can see I'm a little bit encouraged by that. Plus he said that if Gaddafi was in power, Trump said this, if the politicians had gone to the beach and just left Gaddafi alone, we'd be better off. And even Saddam, he said, we'd be better off than we are today with the problems we've got now. Who's going to argue with that? I certainly can't argue with that. So I disagree with Trump on so many things. But when it comes to those big issues, that's a very encouraging thing to hear. I would trust him with his finger on the button, so to speak, his proverbial finger on the button. If he says that he wants a peace deal, and that's his number one priority as president, foreign policy-wise, then Marco Rubio, John Kasich, or Ted Cruz, who keep talking about wanting to punch Russia in the nose, and we need to arm the rebels, and we need war here, and we need to go kick the behinds of the North Koreans. It's endless with these people. They just want war after war after war, and they think that projecting this sort of aggression is going to, endear them to their voting base. And Trump has rejected that. So, like I said, you got to look carefully at Donald Trump. He's a very complex individual, and this is a very complex phenomenon that defies the normal narrative lines. And so it's definitely something people need to look closely at, and don't dismiss anything out of hand, because I think it's all in process right now.
And because I've said so much about him, I'm not going to say anything else. I'm giving you the last word on that. Patrick, brilliant having you back on the programme. Thanks for coming on at short notice. Folks, 21stcenturywire.com. Get on there, read it, and check out Patrick every Sunday and a cast of terrific guests every Sunday at 5 p.m. GMT at alternatecurrentradio.com. Mate, thanks again. Look after yourself, and we'll talk again real soon.
Okay, take care, Richie. Thanks.
Bye for now. Patrick Henningsen on the line to us there. Great man, top man.